The summer of 1986 shattered a small American town when 7-year-old Anna Mae McConnell vanished during a 4th of July picnic, leaving behind only footprints in the soft dirt and a family that would never be the same. For 35 years, the residents of Willow Creek carried the weight of the unsolved mystery. A child there one moment, gone the next, as if swallowed by the ancient woods that bordered their cherished park. The desperate search yielded no answers, no witnesses with conclusive information, no evidence that led anywhere, no closure for the parents who went to sleep each night wondering where their daughter lay. The case eventually went cold, becoming another tragic statistic, another painful memory in Willow Creek's otherwise unremarkable history. But in the bitter winter of 2021, nature itself seemed to offer a clue. An unusually harsh freeze killed back the invasive ivy that had for decades choked the park's northeastern section. And on a crisp February morning, when amateur photographer Benjamin Travers ventured into the newly exposed grove of ancient oaks, his camera captured something impossible. Anna Mae's name carved into the rough bark of a massive oak, dated the very day she disappeared. Hidden for decades behind thick vegetation, protected in a natural crevice in the tree's trunk, the childish handwriting reopened wounds that had never truly healed and ignited an investigation that would unearth secrets some had thought safely buried with time. As modern forensic techniques examined the weathered inscription, investigators realized the truth about that summer day was always there, literally etched in wood, waiting for someone to find it, and brave enough to follow where it led. Benjamin Travers exhaled, his breath forming a cloud in the crisp February air as he adjusted his camera lens. Morning mist curled around the old oaks of Willow Creek Park, lending an ethereal quality to his photographs. At 32, Benjamin had built a modest following online, documenting forgotten places and hidden history. Urban exploration, with a weakness for nature's reclamation, as his profile stated. Today's project was documenting the park's oldest section before the upcoming spring renovations. The northeastern corner, long neglected due to its designation as an environmentally sensitive area, had become more accessible after last winter's unusually harsh freeze killed back the invasive English ivy that had choked the area for decades. The park board had finally approved a careful restoration, and Benjamin wanted to capture the ancient oaks in their raw, weathered state before landscapers arrived. "These old fellows have seen a lot," he murmured to himself, framing a shot of gnarled branches against the pale winter sky. He moved deeper into the grove, where the oldest trees stood like sentinels. Their massive trunks bore the scars of decades, some from lightning strikes, others from human hands. Near what must have been the center of the grove, Benjamin paused before an especially massive oak. Its trunk, easily 6 feet in diameter, was a living record of the town's history. Hundreds of carvings marked its bark, initials inside hearts, graduation years, names of people long gone. Most were weathered to near invisibility, with only the deepest cuts still legible. Benjamin circled the tree, photographing the more interesting markings, when something caught his eye. A section of bark, recently exposed where a thick curtain of ivy had died back, revealed carvings that had been hidden for years. Running his fingers over the rough surface, he stopped at a faded but distinct inscription, partially protected by a natural crevice in the trunk. Anna Mae, July 4th, 1886. Something about the childish handwriting and precise date triggered a memory. The carving sat at what would be a child's eye level, the letters carefully formed but distinctly juvenile. Benjamin photographed it from several angles, making sure to capture the date clearly. That evening, he posted a selection of his day's photographs online, with the caption, "Exploring the Forgotten Corners of Willow Creek Park. These old oaks are like history books if you look closely enough. found this carving from 1986, Anime 07-04-86. Anyone know the story? He added tags for local history groups and moved on to editing his other shots. By morning, his post had exploded. Dozens of comments appeared, many from longtime residents expressing shock and disbelief. Several simply read, "Call Sheriff Mills immediately." Confused, Benjamin scrolled through the responses until one detailed comment caught his eye. "That's Anna Mae McConnell. She disappeared from the park that exact day, July 4th, 1986. 7 years old, never found. It was the biggest case in Willow Creek history. How did no one find this carving before? Where exactly in the park is this tree?" Benjamin stared at his screen, suddenly understanding the significance of his discovery. He immediately called the sheriff's office. Sheriff David Mills, 63, with steel gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had seen too much, sat at his desk reviewing budget reports when his deputy knocked on the door. "Got a strange call you might want to take, Sheriff. Guy named Benjamin Travers says he found something in the park related to the McConnell case." Mills's head snapped up. "The McConnell case? Put him through." Minutes later, Mills was staring at the photo Benjamin had forwarded to his email. His coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the floor as cold recognition washed over him. "My God," he whispered, "it's her." For Mills, the image instantly transported him back 35 years to his first month as a rookie officer, when a 7-year-old girl with blonde curls vanished without a trace and changed the town forever. Flashback to July 4th, 1986. The day dawned bright and clear, promising perfect weather for the town's centennial Independence Day celebration. By mid-morning, Willow Creek Park teemed with families claiming their spaces for the day-long festivities, culminating in what the local newspaper had promised would be the most spectacular fireworks display in county history. The McConnell family arrived shortly before noon. Thomas McConnell, a 35-year-old construction foreman with calloused hands but gentle eyes, spread a red checkered blanket under the shade of ancient oaks near the park's central picnic area. His wife Nora, 33, a third-grade teacher at Willow Creek Elementary, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, unpacked a wicker picnic basket filled with fried chicken, potato salad, and her famous lemonade. Their 12-year-old daughter Grace, already showing signs of the meticulous nature that would later serve her well in medical school, organized the paper plates and plastic utensils with methodical precision, occasionally glancing longingly at the book protruding from her backpack. And 7-year-old Anna Mae, a whirlwind of energy in a yellow sundress with white flowers, danced impatiently around the blanket, her blonde curls bouncing with each movement. "Can I go play, Mommy? Please?" Anna tugged at Nora's sleeve, pointing toward the code playground where other children were already climbing and swinging. "Billy and Sarah from my class are over there?" "After we eat," Nora said firmly, smoothing her daughter's unruly hair with a practiced hand. "And stay where Grace can see you afterward." "But Grace never watches. She just reads her stupid books," Anna protested, earning a glare from her older sister. "I do too watch you," Grace countered, arranging the napkins into a perfect stack. "I just don't have to stare at you every second." Thomas intervened before the bickering could escalate. "Girls, that's enough. Today's supposed to be fun. Grace, you will keep an eye on your sister. Anna Mae, you will stay where she can see you. Understood?" Both girls nodded, temporarily subdued by their father's tone. The park buzzed with festivities around them. Families gathered around picnic tables decorated with patriotic streamers. Teenagers tossed frisbees on the open grass. Local officials in pressed shirts circulated, shaking hands and building goodwill for the upcoming elections. Thomas waved to co-workers and neighbors, while Nora arranged their lunch on the blanket. Anna Mae fidgeted throughout the meal, her attention constantly drawn to butterflies, running children, and the distant sound of the local high school band warming up. She picked at her chicken and ignored her vegetables entirely, earning a half-hearted reprimand from Nora, who understood her daughter's impatience on such an exciting day. "Grace, watch your sister," Thomas said when they'd finished eating, handing his older daughter a can of soda. "Don't let her wander off. We'll be right over there talking to the Hendersons." Grace nodded, already pulling her book from her backpack. "I know, Dad. I won't let her out of my sight." After extracting a promise from Anna May to stay within shouting distance, Thomas and Nora walked over to chat with friends they'd spotted setting up their own picnic 20 yards away. Grace settled against a tree trunk, positioning herself so she could glance up from her book and spot her sister's yellow dress among the playing children. Free at last, Anna May raced toward the Code playground, instantly joining a game of tag with her classmates. For over an hour she remained within easy view, occasionally waving to Grace when their eyes met. As the afternoon progressed, Anna May grew bored with organized games. With the boundless curiosity of a 7-year-old, she began exploring the edges of the picnic area, collecting pine cones, interesting rocks, and occasionally a wildflower to add to her growing treasure collection, piled near Grace's feet. During one return to the picnic blanket for a drink, Anna noticed a black marker protruding from her mother's purse. With the casual entitlement of childhood, she pocketed it without a word, already forming plans for her next adventure. The summer heat intensified as the afternoon wore on. Grace, engrossed in her novel, looked up less frequently. When a group of older kids she recognized from middle school set up a volleyball net nearby, her attention divided further. Anna May, sensing her sister's distraction, ventured farther from the Code playground, following a butterfly toward the northeastern section of the park where tall oaks stood in a less populated area. There, in the dappled shade of an ancient oak, Anna May uncapped her borrowed marker and stared at the rough bark. Other trees nearby bore carvings, grown-up things like J+M Forever and Class of '83 rules. With childish determination, she pressed the marker against the bark, carefully printing her name and the date in her best school handwriting. To her, it was a secret treasure, proof that Anna May McConnell existed on this perfect summer day, a permanent mark on the world. Satisfied with her work, she recapped the marker and turned to head back to the Code playground. But a rustle in the undergrowth caught her attention. A rabbit, freezing momentarily before darting deeper into the trees. Anna May hesitated only briefly before following, her yellow dress flashing between tree trunks as she pursued the creature along a faint trail leading away from the park's main areas. Back at the picnic blanket, Thomas checked his watch. "Almost 4 o'clock. Where are the girls?" "Grace is watching Anna," Nora replied, arranging leftover food into containers. "They were over by the Code playground last I checked. It's getting hot. The fireworks won't start until 9. Maybe we should take a break, go home for a few hours, and come back later." Nora nodded agreement, and they began packing up their picnic. Thomas called toward the Code playground. "Grace! Anna May! Time to pack up!" When only Grace appeared, walking slowly with her nose still in her book, Thomas frowned. "Where's your sister?" Grace looked up, blinking as if emerging from another world. She was just here, playing by those trees. She pointed toward the Code playground, suddenly registering the absence of her sister's yellow dress among the other children. "When did you last see her?" Nora asked, her voice sharpening with the first edge of concern. "I don't know. Maybe 20 minutes ago. She was collecting rocks and stuff." Thomas stood, scanning the area. "Anna May," he called, his voice carrying across the picnic grounds. A few heads turned, but no little girl came running. "Anna May!" Nora's voice rose above the park's festivities, the first threads of panic weaving through her call. Thomas jogged toward the Code playground, checking behind play structures and trees, asking children if they'd seen a girl in a yellow dress. Grace, her book forgotten on the ground, described her sister to a circle of other children, her face growing paler with each shake of their heads. "She was right there. I only looked away for a minute," Grace stammered to her mother, who was now methodically searching the area around their picnic blanket, lifting tablecloths and looking under benches with increasingly frantic movements. The sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. Families packed up blankets and coolers, heading home to rest before returning for the evening fireworks. The McConnells remained, their voices growing hoarse from calling Anna's name. Thomas organized other fathers into informal search parties, dividing the park into sections to be combed thoroughly. Park rangers arrived first, alerted by a concerned family at a nearby picnic table. They brought walkie-talkies and flashlights, taking detailed descriptions and establishing a search perimeter. When 30 minutes of organized searching yielded nothing, they called the Willow Creek Police Department. Officer David Mills, 24 and only 3 weeks into his first job in law enforcement, arrived with his training officer. His crisp new uniform and earnest expression belied his nerves as he pulled out his notepad and approached the distraught parents. "What was she wearing?" he asked, pen poised. "A yellow sundress with white flowers," Nora said, clutching one of Anna's abandoned sandals that they'd found near the Code playground. "And her hair," her voice broke, "blonde curls just past her shoulders. She usually wears it with these." She held up a pair of daisy-patterned hair clips. "But she might have taken them out. She does that when she plays hard." Mills radioed the description as darkness began to fall. More officers arrived, and flashlight beams cut through the growing shadows like searchlights. By 8 o'clock, the park's festive atmosphere had transformed entirely. The fireworks display was postponed as the entire police force mobilized for the search. Search dogs arrived from the county sheriff's department, sniffing Anna's discarded jacket for a scent trail. They followed it to the Code playground, around the picnic area, briefly toward the northeastern wooded section, and then lost it near the old access road that maintenance vehicles used, one of several trails leading from the park. "Could someone have picked her up?" a detective asked Mills quietly as they watched the dog handlers working. The question hung in the air, unthinkable, yet demanding consideration. Mills, despite his inexperience, recognized the grim shift in the investigation's tone. What had begun as a search for a wandering child was transforming into something potentially much darker. By midnight, the picnic grounds had become a full crime scene. Yellow tape surrounded Anna's last known locations. Police photographers documented footprints in the softer ground. Volunteers handed out flyers with Anna's school picture, gap-toothed smile, mischievous eyes, blonde curls tamed for photo day. A witness approached Mills as he coordinated a group of volunteer searchers. "I saw a green car parked near the northeastern trail entrance around 5 p.m., the man said, identifying himself as a high school teacher who had been reading in a quiet corner of the park. "There was a man inside watching the kids play. Didn't think much of it then." "Can you describe him?" Mills asked, pulse quickening. "Not really. Baseball cap, sunglasses, kept to himself. I noticed because it seemed odd to park there instead of the main lot, but I figured maybe he wanted shade." "Could you identify the make of the car?" "Some kind of sedan, older model, dull green, like it needed a wash." The green car became the investigation's first solid lead. Police interviewed every family at the park that day, creating a log of vehicles and their owners. They checked records of known sex offenders in neighboring counties. But no one had caught the license plate of the mysterious green sedan, and in 1986, the park had no security cameras to check. Days passed. Search parties combed ever-widening circles around the park, focusing on the densely wooded areas to the northeast where the dogs had briefly tracked Anna's scent. Helicopters with thermal imaging scanned from above. Divers checked the small lake half a mile away. Nothing. The northeastern section, with its old-growth trees and thick undergrowth, proved particularly challenging to search thoroughly. Teams with machetes cut paths through the denser areas, but the terrain made a comprehensive search nearly impossible. Authorities focused more resources on the more accessible areas and potential routes a child or an abductor might have taken. Thomas barely slept, joining every search until his feet blistered and his voice failed. At night, he would sit in Anna's bedroom, holding her favorite stuffed rabbit, replaying every moment of that day, searching for something he might have done differently. Nora sat by the phone, jumping at every ring, answering dozens of calls from well-meaning neighbors and friends, each conversation ending with the same devastating answer: no news yet. Grace withdrew into silence, crushed by guilt. At 12, she was old enough to understand her responsibility and its consequences, but too young to process the magnitude of what had happened. She stopped eating, stopped speaking, responding to questions with nods or shrugs. Her parents, consumed by their own grief, hardly noticed her spiral until her pediatrician recommended immediate therapy. 2 weeks after the disappearance, the FBI became involved. Agent Catherine Harriman, a specialist in child abductions with a decade of experience, brought new resources and methodology to the investigation. She set up a command center in the community hall, walls covered with maps, timelines, and photographs, documenting every aspect of the case. "We're looking at several possibilities," she told the McConnells during their first meeting. Her office in the command center offered the first privacy they had had in weeks, away from neighbors' pitying glances and reporters' probing questions. She could have wandered off and gotten lost, or someone at the park that day took her. "Who?" Thomas demanded, his voice raw from calling his daughter's name across miles of woodland. "Who would take our little girl?" Harriman hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "We're investigating a similar case from 2 years ago in Millfield, about 40 miles north. Different circumstances, but the same age range and a similar sudden disappearance from a public place." Nora clutched Thomas's hand, her knuckles white. "You think it's connected?" "We can't rule it out. That's why I've been called in, to look for patterns that might not be obvious locally." During the expanded investigation, Thomas's estranged brother Robert came to authorities' attention after several witnesses mentioned seeing him at the picnic. Robert McConnell, 38, with a history of minor financial troubles and a reputation for volatility, had not been invited to the family gathering. When questioned, Robert claimed he had only stopped by briefly to drop off a birthday gift for Anna, a collectible porcelain doll, before leaving for his evening shift at a construction site in Riverdale, 30 miles away. The site foreman confirmed he had clocked in for the 7:30 p.m. to 3:30 a.m. shift, providing what appeared to be a solid alibi. "I know Tommy and I have our differences," Robert told investigators, referencing long-standing tensions with his brother over money and their divergent life paths. "But that kid means the world to me. She's the only one in the family who's always happy to see Uncle Bobby." His alibi, combined with the lack of physical evidence linking him to Anna's disappearance, led investigators to focus elsewhere. The green car remained their most promising lead, but as days turned to weeks without new information, even that trail grew cold. Summer faded into fall. The command center closed as Agent Harriman was called to other cases. The massive volunteer search parties dwindled to a handful of dedicated locals. Officer Mills, now assigned to regular patrol duties, continued searching on his days off, feeling personally responsible for the case that had defined his first months on the force. The case file grew thick with witness statements, investigative reports, and dead-end leads. Psychics offered their services, sending maps with locations marked in red. Anonymous tips came in whenever a blonde child was spotted within a 100-mile radius. Each lead was investigated. Each led nowhere. On what would have been Anna's 8th birthday in August, Nora baked a chocolate cake with buttercream frosting, Anna's favorite. The family gathered around the dining table, 3 places set, the 4th holding only a single candle and a school photograph. No one sang. No one made a wish. Thomas excused himself after a few minutes, and the sound of his fist connecting with the garage wall reverberated through the house. Grace, still attending therapy 3 times weekly, picked at her slice without eating, watching her mother's tears fall silently onto the tablecloth. 1 year passed. The community held a candlelight vigil in the park, careful to position it away from the areas most associated with the search. Anna's class at Willow Creek Elementary left an empty desk with flowers on what would have been her first day of 3rd grade. The McConnells began taking detours to avoid driving past the park entrance, the site too laden with memories to bear. The investigation continued in fits and starts. Each new officer assigned to the case brought fresh eyes but found the same obstacles: too much time passed, too little physical evidence, too many possible scenarios. The green car, the mysterious male figure, Anna's last known whereabouts, none of it cohered into a solvable puzzle. 5 years after the disappearance, a routine case review brought a new detective to the McConnells' door. Detective Marcus Wilson, recently transferred from a larger department with experience in cold cases, had no new evidence, just the same questions they'd answered dozens of times before. He asked about Robert again, about Thomas's relationship with his brother, about whether Anna might have recognized him and willingly gone with him, despite Thomas's instructions to stay away. "My brother had an alibi," Thomas snapped after an hour of increasingly pointed questions. "He was at work, 30 miles away. You people confirmed that 15 times. "Sometimes alibis don't tell the whole story," Wilson replied calmly. "Sometimes—" Thomas lost his temper, throwing the detective out of the house with a stream of obscenities that brought neighbors to their windows. That night, he and Nora fought bitterly, blame erupting after years of careful avoidance. "You were supposed to be watching her," Thomas shouted, pacing their living room like a caged animal. "You were her mother." "Me? I asked you to keep an eye on the girls," Nora screamed back, years of contained grief exploding into rage. "You were too busy talking about baseball with Dave Miller to even notice they weren't at the blanket anymore. I told Grace to watch her. That was her one job." "She was 12 years old, Thomas. 12. And you're blaming her instead of—" Nora stopped abruptly, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air between them. "Instead of who, Nora?" Thomas's voice dropped dangerously. "Instead of who? Say it." "Instead of your brother," she whispered. "The one person at that park none of us wanted there." Grace, now 17, listened to her parents fight from her bedroom, where she had retreated as soon as the detective left. She packed a bag that night and left for her aunt's house in the neighboring town. Though she would return for brief visits over the years, she never really came home again. 10 years after the disappearance, the case officially went cold. Detective Mills, now a senior officer on the force, delivered the news personally. The file would remain open, but active investigation would cease without new evidence. "I'm sorry," he told Nora, who sat alone in the kitchen. Thomas had moved out 3 years earlier, filing for divorce after one too many nights of recrimination and heartbreak. "We've exhausted every lid, interviewed everyone multiple times, but I promise you, if anything new comes up—" "It won't," Nora said flatly, staring at the refrigerator still covered with Anna's artwork. "She's gone. Just say it." Mills couldn't. He'd begun his career with Anna Mae McConnell, and her absence had shaped his approach to policing as surely as his academy training. Each time he drove past the park, he scanned the trees, the code playground, the picnic areas, still looking for a flash of yellow among the green. The years crawled by, marking their passage on the town and its people. The McConnell family, once a picture of middle-class contentment, splintered beyond repair. Thomas remarried 3 years after the divorce was finalized, a quiet ceremony in Florida with his new wife, Rebecca, a kindergarten teacher with a gentle manner and no children of her own. He started fresh in the Sunshine State, working his way up to construction supervisor, creating a life where he wasn't defined by tragedy. Grace graduated college with honors, then medical school, settling in Seattle, as far from Willow Creek as she could manage while staying in the continental United States. She changed her last name to her husband's, Winters, when they married after her residency. She told no one at the hospital where she worked as a pediatrician about her past, about the sister she had failed to protect, about the weight she still carried. Only her husband knew the full story, and even he learned to avoid certain topics: why she would never let their children go to public parks alone, why she tensed when she saw little girls in yellow dresses, why she sometimes woke screaming from nightmares she refused to describe. Nora stayed in Willow Creek, unable to leave the place where she last saw her daughter. Some part of her, irrational but unshakable, believed that if Anna Mae ever found her way home, she would come to the house she remembered. Nora continued teaching at the elementary school until retirement, known to generations of children as the sad teacher, who was especially protective during recess and field trips. Her house gradually transformed into a shrine to Anna Mae. Photographs covering walls, toys preserved in dusty display cases, a bedroom unchanged except for the gifts added each birthday to mark the milestones of a life unlived. For Anna's 16th birthday, Nora bought a silver charm bracelet. For her 21st, a bottle of champagne that remained unopened in the refrigerator. For her 30th, a framed photograph of what she might have looked like, generated by one of those age progression specialists who worked with families of missing children. The town changed around her. The old park underwent partial renovations. New code playground equipment replaced the structures Anna had climbed. Some paths were rerouted to improve accessibility. A small memorial bench with Anna's name sat near the main entrance, largely forgotten except by longtime residents who occasionally left flowers on the anniversary of her disappearance. The northeastern section, with its ancient oaks and dense undergrowth, remained largely untouched, deemed environmentally sensitive and left to nature, a decision partly influenced by the area's painful associations. Officer Mills became Detective Mills, then Lieutenant Mills, and finally Sheriff Mills, building his career on a reputation for thoroughness and compassion. He married a dispatcher from the county sheriff's office, raised 3 daughters with an overprotectiveness his wife gently teased him about, and built a life that outsiders would call successful. But Anna's file stayed in his bottom drawer, transferred from desk to desk as he moved up the ranks. Sometimes, late at night, when the office was empty, he would open it, spread the contents across his desk, and stare at the case that had shaped his career, searching for something everyone had missed. In 2006, the 20th anniversary brought brief media attention. A true crime television show produced a special episode, recreating the events of that July day with actors and dramatic music. Nora refused to participate. Thomas gave a short, uncomfortable interview by phone, his Florida accent already creeping into his speech. Grace changed her number when producers tracked her down at the Seattle hospital where she worked. Local theories evolved into urban legends over the decades. Children dared each other to visit Anna's woods at night, claiming her ghost wandered among the trees, still looking for her family. Teenagers told embellished stories about the 4th of July ghost who appeared in the park's northeastern section, trying to find her way home. Few remembered the real girl with grass-stained knees and unruly curls. She had become a cautionary tale, a boogeyman, a ghost story to frighten children into staying close to their parents. In 2016, the FBI's Cold Case Unit requested the file as part of a project re-examining unsolved child disappearances from the 1980s. They applied new technology and criminal profiling techniques unavailable in 1986, digitizing old witness statements and evidence for computer analysis. Their conclusion, delivered in a 30-page report, Anna Mae was likely taken by someone she knew or trusted, possibly someone with connections to the community who left the area shortly after the abduction. They provided a list of 23 people who fit their profile, including several names never seriously considered in the original investigation. Sheriff Mills interviewed each person on the list, traveling as far as Arizona and Maine to question people who had left Willow Creek decades earlier. He found nothing conclusive. Some had solid alibis, others seemed genuinely shocked to learn they had been considered even peripherally, and a few had died in the intervening years. The case returned to his bottom drawer, the new FBI report added to the growing file. Nora, now in her 70s with silver hair and deeply lined skin, developed a ritual. Each morning, weather permitting, she walked slowly through the renovated park, touching trees, searching for something even she couldn't name. Sometimes she brought a thermos of coffee and sat on Anna's memorial bench, watching children play with a mixture of joy and sorrow that never diminished with time. Locals grew accustomed to the sight of the elderly woman communing with ancient oaks, her whispered conversations with the daughter who never came home. "I still tell her about my day," Nora explained to Sheriff Mills when he encountered her during one of her morning walks. "I tell her about Grace's children. She has 2 now, a girl and a boy. Anna would have been an aunt." She smiled sadly. "I tell her about the town, how it's changed. I don't know if she can hear me, but it helps to talk to her." Mills nodded, understanding. In his 35 years in law enforcement, he had seen many manifestations of grief, but few as enduring or as dignified as Nora McConnell's. He sometimes joined her on the bench, sharing coffee and memories of the investigation, both of them growing older in the shadow of a 7-year-old's eternal youth. Benjamin Travers's photo spread through Willow Creek's online community like wildfire. Old-timers immediately recognized the significance, sharing memories and theories in long comment threads. Younger residents learned the story through rushed explanations and shared links to old news articles and the true crime episode that periodically resurfaced on streaming platforms. By midday, Benjamin's post had been shared hundreds of times, reaching far beyond Willow Creek to true crime forums and missing persons groups across the country. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications and messages, many asking for the tree's exact location, others offering theories ranging from plausible to absurd. Sheriff Mills drove to Nora's house personally, bypassing the department protocol that would have sent a deputy. Finding her in the garden where she grew Anna's favorite flowers, daisies and black-eyed Susans, he approached slowly, aware of how fragile hope could be. "Nora," he said gently, "something's been found in the park. I wanted you to hear it from me first." She straightened slowly, arthritis making her movements deliberate. "David," she said, using his first name as she had for decades now, "what is it? You have that look." He showed her the photo on his phone, enlarging it so she could see the carving clearly despite her failing eyesight. "A photographer found this yesterday in the northeastern section, where the ivy died back after the freeze." Nora's gardening gloves fell to the ground as she took the phone with trembling hands. "Is it possible?" she whispered, tracing the image with her finger. "After all this time." "I've already called Detective Reeves from the State Cold Case Unit," Mills said, referring to Lydia Reeves, whose reputation for solving long-dormant cases had earned her the nickname the Resurrection Agent among law enforcement circles. "She's on her way from the Capitol, and I've secured the area around the tree." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "Does Thomas know? Grace?" "I'll call them as soon as I leave here. I wanted you to be the first." The next morning, Nora stood before the massive oak, her aged hand touching the weathered carving with reverent fingers. Yellow police tape cordoned off the area, and 2 officers stood at a respectful distance. Detective Lydia Reeves, 46, with keen gray eyes and the focused intensity of a woman who had built her career on giving families answers, watched Nora carefully. "It's her handwriting," Nora said confidently. "I'd know it anywhere." She traced the childish letters with arthritic fingers. She wrote just like this in her diary, the A with the little curl at the top. She was so proud when her teacher praised her penmanship. Detective Reeves nodded, making notes. The lab will confirm, but this appears authentic based on preliminary examination. The oxidation and bark growth suggest it's from the stated time period. This section was virtually impenetrable for decades, Mills added, gesturing to the fallen ivy vines still visible on the ground around them. The park conservation team says this species of ivy can grow up to 3 feet per year in ideal conditions. It would have covered this area completely within a few years of Anna's disappearance. Reeves studied the tree's position. And the carving is in a natural crevice, partially protected from the elements. Combined with the ivy coverage, it's not surprising it remained intact. She turned to Mills. You said this area was searched at the time? Mills nodded, discomfort evident in his expression. We did sweeps of the entire park, but he hesitated. The northeastern section was dense, difficult terrain, and truthfully, we focused more on the areas a child was likely to wander, the code playground, the picnic grounds, the main trails. This far in, it wasn't a priority. Because you were looking for a child, not a tiny marking on a tree, Reeves assured him. No one would expect to find this during a missing person search. She turned back to Nora. Mrs. McConnell, was Anna in the habit of marking things, writing her name on belongings or places? Nora nodded slowly. She had just learned cursive that spring. She was practicing all the time, on napkins, in the margins of books. A small smile touched her lips. I scolded her for writing her name inside her dresser drawer. She said she wanted people to know it was hers forever. Within days, the investigation roared back to life with an intensity that surprised even longtime residents who remembered the original search. Ground-penetrating radar teams scanned the soil around the tree, searching for any anomalies that might indicate disturbed earth. Forensic botanists took samples from the bark around the carving, confirming through laboratory analysis that the marking dated to the mid-1980s, based on the tree's growth patterns and ink degradation. An arborist from the State University explained how this particular species of oak, Quercus macrocarpa, or bur oak, forms calluses around wounds slowly, essentially preserving carvings rather than growing over them completely. These trees can live 300 years or more, he told reporters gathered at the park entrance. They're living historical records. Combined with the protection offered by the crevice and years of ivy coverage, it's not surprising the carving remained remarkably intact. The FBI sent a team specializing in long-term missing persons cases, including a forensic anthropologist and a specialist in cold case reconstruction. The state police contributed their mobile laboratory, parking the converted RV near the park entrance. News vans from regional and even national outlets lined the street, their satellite dishes competing for space. Social media exploded with theories. True crime podcasters descended on Willow Creek, recording episodes from the local diner and interviewing anyone willing to share memories of that summer day. Nora's phone rang constantly with reporters seeking interviews and psychics offering services. She disconnected it after the second day, communicating only through Sheriff Mills, who appointed a deputy to stay with her and screen visitors. In Seattle, Dr. Grace McConnell Winters stared at a news alert on her phone during a rare quiet moment between patients. Her husband, James, found her frozen in their kitchen that evening, color drained from her face, the same alert still open on her screen. Grace? What's wrong? He asked, instantly concerned by her expression. They found something, she whispered, her voice hollow. About Anna. Your sister? James set down his briefcase, moving to her side. Though they had been married 15 years, Anna remained a difficult subject, a shadow that occasionally darkened their otherwise happy home. Someone found her name carved in a tree from that day? Grace's hands trembled so violently that James gently took the phone, reading the article himself. "You should go," he said simply. "I'll cover with the kids. Tell the hospital it's a family emergency." In Florida, Thomas McConnell's new wife, Rebecca, answered the door to find a local reporter asking for comment about the breakthrough in your husband's daughter's case. Rebecca, who knew only the broad outlines of Thomas's past, that he had lost a child, that the marriage hadn't survived the tragedy, stood confused in the doorway of their Tampa bungalow. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, discomfort evident in her posture. "The carving found in Willow Creek Park," the reporter pressed. "Anna Mae's name. Has Thomas been contacted by investigators?" That evening, after a tense dinner during which Rebecca carefully avoided the subject, Thomas received a call from Sheriff Mills. They hadn't spoken in over 5 years, not since Mills had visited Florida to interview him about one of the names on the FBI's profile list, a former neighbor who had moved to Tampa around the same time as Thomas. "They found her name, Tommy," Mills said, using the childhood nickname few people still used. "Carved in a tree in the northeastern section. Lab confirms it's from that day." Silence stretched across the line, punctuated only by Thomas's ragged breathing. Finally, he asked, "Is it really her writing?" Nora says yes. The lab says the timing matches. It's her, Tommy. Another long pause. "I'm coming home." That night, Thomas explained everything to Rebecca, not just the broad strokes she knew, but every painful detail he had kept locked away. The picnic, the search, the accusations, the disintegration of his family, the brother he hadn't spoken to in 30 years, the daughter he still saw in his dreams, running toward him in a yellow dress, never quite reaching his outstretched arms. The investigation progressed methodically under Detective Reeves's direction. Original witnesses were re-interviewed, many now elderly, their memories filtered through decades of retelling. The forensic team made a significant discovery: microscopic fibers embedded in the bark near Anna's carving, yellow cotton consistent with her sundress. "She stood right here," Reeves explained to Mills as they examined the evidence report. "Leaned against the tree while she wrote. The fibers transferred to the sap that was exposed when she carved into the bark." Sheriff Mills reviewed his notes from 1986, focusing on the green car that had been their most promising lead. Vehicle registration records from that period had been digitized in a statewide cold case initiative 3 years earlier, allowing for cross-referencing with known offenders and park visitors documented during the investigation. A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Benjamin Travers's photo, shared across multiple platforms, caught the attention of Harold Winters, now 82, and living in a nursing home 50 miles away. Harold's daughter showed him the image on her tablet during her weekly visit, explaining the renewed investigation it had sparked. "Daddy, do you remember this case? You used to take pictures at all the town events back then. Were you at this picnic?" Harold stared at the image, recognition dawning in eyes clouded by cataracts. "I was there," he said slowly. "Had my Nikon. Took pictures all day." "Did you share them with the police when that little girl went missing?" Harold's hands began to tremble, most of them. But there was one roll. "I developed it later, after everything died down." He looked at his daughter with sudden urgency. "I need to talk to someone about what I saw." The next day, Harold Winters sat across from Detective Reeves in the nursing home's visitor lounge, his daughter beside him for support. "I was the town's unofficial photographer back then," he explained. "Took pictures at every event, parades, graduations, picnics. Donated copies to the Historical Society." "And you were at the park on July 4th, 1986, Reeves prompted. "All day. Took 6 rolls of film." Harold's hands twisted in his lap. "When Anna went missing, I gave 5 rolls to the police. But 1 roll was still in my camera. I developed it myself a few days later in my darkroom." "Did you find something on that roll, Mr. Winters?" Harold nodded slowly. There was a sequence of photos. Anna near that oak tree. She had a marker, was writing something, and in the background, he swallowed hard. Robert McConnell was watching her, from behind some bushes. Thomas McConnell's brother? Reeves leaned forward, her interest sharpening. Yes, everyone knew there was bad blood between them. Robert had borrowed money, never paid it back, had a gambling problem back then. But what scared me wasn't just seeing him watching Anna. It was what I recognized in another shot. What was that, Mr. Winters? His car. Parked on the maintenance road, a green Chevrolet Malibu, about 10 years old then, dull paint. The same car witnesses reported. Where are those photos now, Mr. Winters? Harold's daughter answered. Daddy kept a safety deposit box at Willow Creek Bank. He maintained it all these years, even after moving here. The key is in his personal effects. She hesitated. He never told me what was in it, just that it was important, and someday he might need it. The contents of Harold Winters' safety deposit box proved invaluable. The photographs, carefully preserved in acid-free sleeves, provided a timeline of that July afternoon, including a sequence showing Anna at various points throughout the day. Most significantly, they captured her standing by the oak tree, marker in hand, concentrating on her carving. And in the background of two photos, partially obscured by foliage but unmistakable to those who knew him, stood Robert McConnell, watching. Another photo, taken from a different angle as Harold moved through the park, captured Robert's green Chevrolet parked on the maintenance road that provided access to the northeastern section, the same vehicle description witnesses had reported seeing that day. Detective Reeves confronted Thomas, who had returned to Willow Creek and was staying at the local motel. Did you know your brother was at the picnic that day? Thomas's face hardened. He showed up uninvited, said he wanted to give Anna a birthday present, even though her birthday wasn't until August. The doll, Reeves said. Yes, a porcelain collector's thing, too fragile for a 7-year-old, but Anna was thrilled. I told him to leave, but she was so excited to see him. Thomas hesitated, conflict evident in his expression. There's something I never told the police. 2 weeks after she disappeared, I was helping Robert move some furniture to his new apartment. I found one of Anna's hair ribbons in his car, yellow with little daisies on it. She'd been wearing it that day. You found evidence and didn't report it? Reeves asked incredulously. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. He was my brother. He had an alibi. His boss confirmed he was at work that evening. I told myself Anna must have left it there earlier when he gave her a ride once. I wanted to believe him. His voice broke. I didn't want to think that my own brother could have, that I let him near her that day. Further investigation revealed critical discrepancies in Robert's alibi. His time card from the construction company showed he had clocked in at 7:30 p.m. on July 4, 1986. But witness statements and the timeline established by Harold's photographs placed Anna missing from approximately 5:15 p.m. The window would have allowed Robert to take Anna and still make it to work on time. Moreover, employment records showed Robert had lived in Millfield 2 years before Anna's disappearance, during the period of the similar case Agent Harriman had mentioned. He had moved away from Willow Creek 3 weeks after Anna vanished, taking a series of construction jobs across multiple states before eventually settling in Oak Ridge, a small town 300 miles away, where he had lived under his middle name, James, for the past 15 years. Robert McConnell, now 67 with thinning gray hair and the weathered face of a man who had spent his life working outdoors, sat in an interrogation room at the Willow Creek Sheriff's Station. The local news had reported only that a person of interest was being questioned, his identity still protected while investigators built their case. Initially, he maintained his innocence, insisting he had only seen Anna briefly at the picnic before leaving for work. I gave her a doll, spent maybe 20 minutes there, and left, he told Detective Reeves. Tommy and I weren't on good terms. I wasn't welcome to stay. But faced with the newly discovered photographs clearly showing him watching Anna from concealment, the time card evidence establishing a window of opportunity, and Thomas's statement about finding the ribbon, Robert's facade began to crack. "These pictures show you watching Anna by the tree where she carved her name," Reeves said, laying the photos on the table between them, "not interacting with her openly as a family member, but hiding, observing her when she was alone." Robert stared at the photographs, his expression unreadable. "We also know you lived in Millfield when another little girl disappeared under similar circumstances," Reeves continued, "and that you left town suddenly after Anna vanished." "I got a better job offer," Robert muttered. "Nothing suspicious about that." "Then there's this." Reeves placed an evidence bag containing a yellow ribbon on the table. "Thomas found this in your car 2 weeks after Anna disappeared. He recognized it as hers, but he never reported it. He wanted to believe in you." She leaned forward. "I don't think he can do that anymore." Robert's eyes remained fixed on the ribbon. His shoulders slumped, the defiance draining from his posture. "It was an accident," he finally whispered. "I never meant to hurt her." In an adjacent room, Thomas, Nora, and Grace watched through one-way glass as Detective Reeves and Sheriff Mills conducted the formal interview. Robert explained how financial troubles and jealousy of his brother's perfect life had consumed him for years. Tommy had everything: the nice house, the good job, the beautiful wife, the perfect kids. What did I have? Gambling debts and a crappy apartment. Bitterness crept into his voice. He stopped lending me money, told me to get my life together before I could see the family again, like he was so much better than me. "So you went to the picnic anyway," Reeves prompted. "I bought Anna a doll, spent 2 weeks' pay on it. Thought maybe if Tommy saw how happy she was to see me, he'd soften up. Let me back into their lives." Robert's voice grew softer. "Anna was always my favorite, the only one who was ever happy to see Uncle Bobby." Robert described arriving at the picnic, the tense interaction with Thomas, and Anna's delight at the unexpected gift. "Tommy told me to leave after I gave her the doll, but Anna started crying, said she wanted me to stay. He couldn't say no to her. He had spent about an hour at the picnic, then left as agreed. But instead of driving straight to work, he had parked on the maintenance road and returned on foot, watching the family from a distance. I saw her wandering alone near that old oak. Watched her carving her name," he said. "She looked so happy, so focused. I thought maybe if I could spend some time with her, just us, Tommy might appreciate me more, see me as part of the family again." Behind the glass, Nora made a small, broken sound. Thomas stood rigid, fists clenched at his sides. Robert had approached Anna as she finished her carving. She wasn't scared at all, called me Uncle Bobby, showed me her secret carving, said she was leaving her mark on the world. He suggested they get ice cream, a special treat, just the two of them. She came willingly, skipping beside me, holding my hand, trusted me completely. But instead of heading toward town, Robert had driven Anna to an abandoned hunting cabin on private property, 15 miles outside Willow Creek, well beyond the search perimeter authorities had established. The remote cabin belonged to a former gambling associate who had moved away years earlier, and it didn't appear on any current maps. I just wanted to spend time with her, to have someone look at me the way she did, like I mattered. Robert's voice cracked. I told her we'd get ice cream after, that this was a special secret place. But as the afternoon wore on, Anna had grown increasingly upset, asking for her parents, worried about missing the fireworks. She started crying, said she wanted to go home. I tried to explain that we were having special uncle-niece time, but she wouldn't stop. "What happened then?" Reeves asked quietly. She ran for the door. I grabbed her arm, too hard. She pulled away and fell. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper. Hit her head on the corner of the wood stove. There was so much blood. I tried to stop it, but he covered his face with his hands. She was just gone, so fast. Behind the glass, Grace turned away, unable to watch. Nora's quiet weeping filled the small observation room. "I panicked," Robert continued. "I wrapped her in a blanket from the cabin, drove deeper into the woods. There was an old lightning-struck pine I remembered from hunting trips. Isolated. I buried her there." He paused, then added flatly, "Then I went to work like nothing happened." Clocked in at 7:30. "The other girl in Millfield," Reeves said. "Was that an accident too?" Robert shook his head. "I had nothing to do with that. I swear on my life." Hours of additional questioning supported his claim. Records confirmed he had been working at a documented job site during the Millfield disappearance, and unlike with Anna, he had no connection to the victim. The similarity between the cases appeared to be coincidental, a tragic instance of pattern matching that had nonetheless helped lead investigators to the truth about Anna. The following day, Robert led a somber procession to the remote location where he had buried Anna 35 years earlier. The lightning-struck pine still stood, though dead now, its bare branches reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Forensic technicians carefully excavated the site while the McConnells waited at a respectful distance, united in grief for perhaps the first time since that July day had torn them apart. The small bones they uncovered confirmed the worst. Anna May had been found at last. Fragments of yellow fabric remained, preserved in the soil, along with the second daisy hair clip that had been missing from the pair Nora had shown Officer Mills decades earlier. Back in town, reporters gathered outside the sheriff's station. Detective Reeves gave a brief statement confirming that human remains had been recovered and a suspect was in custody. She omitted the family connection, protecting the McConnells from that public revelation for now. In the quiet of Nora's living room, the three survivors of the McConnell family sat in numbed silence. 35 years of uncertainty had ended with the cruelest certainty of all. "I kept expecting her to walk through the door," Nora said finally, her voice distant. "Even after all these years, I'd imagine what she'd look like as a teenager, a young woman. I kept buying her presents, keeping her room ready." "I named my daughter Anna," Grace admitted, twisting her wedding ring. "She's 15 now. My husband thinks it's after his grandmother. I've never told him." She looked up at her parents. "I couldn't say her name for so long. Then when my daughter was born, I needed to say it every day, to hear it in my house." Thomas hadn't spoken since Robert's confession. Now he rose, paced to the window that overlooked Nora's garden where Anna May had once helped plant daisies in child-sized rows. "I should have known." There were signs, the ribbon, the way he'd always single her out at family gatherings, his jealousy. "You couldn't have known he'd hurt her," Grace said quietly. "Couldn't I? He was my brother." "I knew he was troubled." Thomas turned, his face ravaged by guilt. "I let him stay at the picnic. For Anna's sake." The revelation landed like a physical blow. All these years, each had carried their own burden of responsibility. Nora for being distracted, Grace for not watching closely enough. Now Thomas's suspicions and silence joined the web of what-ifs that could never be untangled. Detective Reeves arrived with news. Robert had formally confessed to involuntary manslaughter. Given the time past, his cooperation, and the circumstances surrounding Anna's death, he would likely serve between 7 and 12 years. "Is that justice?" Thomas demanded, anger flaring. 7 years for taking everything from us?" "It's closure," Reeves said gently, "which is more than most cold cases ever get." That night, the three McConnells returned to the park. The tree with Anna's carving stood illuminated by police floodlights, the area still cordoned off as a crime scene. An officer recognized them, lifted the tape to let them approach. They stood together before the tree, three broken pieces of what was once a family. Nora reached out, traced the letters of her daughter's name with arthritic fingers. "She was here," she whispered. "All this time, she left us a message." "She wanted to be remembered," Grace said, tears streaming down her face. Thomas placed his hand over the carving as if trying to connect with his daughter through the living wood. "I'm sorry, Anna May," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." In that moment, something shifted between them. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of their shared loss and the years wasted in blame and separation. They had each mourned alone for decades, carrying private burdens of guilt. Now, standing before tangible evidence of Anna's last moments of innocent happiness, they began the process of mourning together. 6 months later, Willow Creek held a proper funeral for Anna Mae McConnell. Spring had returned to the town, bringing daffodils and cherry blossoms. The small white casket containing what little the forensic anthropologists had recovered and identified through DNA testing finally gave Anna's earthly remains a dignified resting place. The community turned out in force, elderly residents who remembered the original search, middle-aged townsfolk who had grown up in the shadow of the tragedy, even teenagers drawn by the recent developments and the true crime podcast that had documented the case's resolution. Benjamin Travers stood respectfully at the back, his discovery having brought a measure of peace to a 35-year tragedy. Robert McConnell, now serving a 12-year sentence with possibility of parole after 7, was not present. His written confession and cooperation had spared the family a trial, though nothing could spare them the knowledge of how Anna had spent her final moments. The knowledge that her death had been accidental rather than intentional provided cold comfort to the McConnells. In his statement, Robert had described Anna's last words, "I want my mommy," a detail that haunted Nora's dreams. Yet knowing the truth, however painful, allowed a different kind of grief to begin, one based in reality rather than the torturous realm of imagination that had plagued them for decades. After the service, Nora approached Detective Reeves beside Anna's newly installed headstone. What will happen to the tree, with the park renovations moving forward? The Historical Society has designated it for preservation, Reeves assured her. Benjamin's been documenting it for their archives. The Parks Department has agreed to build the new paths around it, with a small explanatory plaque if you approve. "I think I'd like that," Nora said softly, "for people to know she was there, that she left her mark." The tree had already become an impromptu memorial. Visitors left small tokens at its base: flowers, stuffed animals, handwritten notes from children and adults alike. The Park Commission eventually installed a small bronze plaque explaining its significance. Anna Mae McConnell, 1979 to 1986. Her name, carved by her own hand on her last day, led us back to her. Thomas delayed his return to Florida, reconnecting with Willow Creek and the life he had fled. Rebecca joined him for a month, meeting Nora for the first time at a tense but ultimately healing dinner, where the two women who had loved Thomas in different chapters of his life found unexpected common ground in their concern for his well-being. He and Nora began tentative conversations about the years they had lost, not just with Anna, but with each other and with Grace. They visited Anna's grave together weekly, sometimes sitting in companionable silence, sometimes sharing memories neither had felt able to voice for decades. Grace introduced her family to her parents through video calls initially, then a carefully planned visit: her husband James, 15-year-old daughter Anna, and 10-year-old son Michael. Young Anna, who had grown up knowing only that she was named after a great-grandmother, learned the truth about her aunt during this visit. She sat with Nora looking through photo albums, struck by the resemblance between herself and the aunt she would never meet. "It's like looking at a ghost," she said, touching a photograph of 7-year-old Anna Mae at the beach. "Same eyes. Same spirit too, I think," Nora replied, watching her granddaughter with wonder. "She would have loved you so much." Grace made plans to bring her family to Willow Creek more regularly, beginning to bridge the chasm that had separated them for decades. Her son Michael formed an immediate bond with Thomas, who taught him to fish in the same creek where he had once taught Grace. Sheriff Mills retired that autumn, his final case solved. At his retirement party, he raised a toast to persistent truth, how some mysteries take a generation to solve, but the answers were there all along, waiting to be found. The Willow Creek Gazette's front-page story about his retirement featured a photo of Mills beside the oak tree, with the headline, "Sheriff Finds Closure in Career-Defining Case." Benjamin Travers published a book of photography featuring the ancient trees of Willow Creek Park, with a special section dedicated to the anime oak, and the story of how his chance discovery had solved a decades-old mystery. He donated a portion of the proceeds to a foundation established in Anna's name, providing therapy services to families of missing children. Harold Winters received a special commendation from the mayor for his role in solving the case. Though his health continued to decline, his daughter reported that he seemed at peace, having finally shared the burden he had carried for 35 years. 1 year after Benjamin's discovery, the three McConnells gathered at the tree for a private moment of remembrance. The park was quiet in the early morning light, the renovation completed around the preserved oak. Thomas had moved back to Willow Creek permanently, buying a small house near Nora's. Grace visited monthly, her children forming relationships with the grandparents they had barely known, existed. "I keep thinking about what she was feeling when she carved this," Nora said, touching the bark where a thin sheet of clear, protective coating now preserved the inscription. Was she happy? Proud of herself for using a grown-up marker? "She was claiming her place in the world," Grace said, standing close to her mother, saying, "I was here, this matters." Thomas nodded, his hand resting lightly on Nora's shoulder. And she was right. It did matter. It led us back to her, and to each other. The three stood in silence, 3 generations of loss and rediscovery embodied in one family. Behind them, young children played on new equipment, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. A reminder that life continues, even in places marked by tragedy. As they turned to leave, Nora paused for one final look at the carving. "Goodbye, sweetheart," she whispered. "We found you." The oak stood sentinel as they walked away together, its branches swaying gently in the wind. Anime's name remained etched in its bark, a child's last message to the world, preserved in living wood, a secret that had waited 35 years to be discovered and, finally, understood. In the years that followed, the McConnells gradually reclaimed their lives from the shadow of tragedy. Nora continued her morning walks in the park, but now she often had company, Thomas or Grace and her family during their visits, or Sheriff Mills in his retirement. The walks became less about searching and more about remembering. Thomas and Nora never remarried, but they found a comfortable companionship in their shared history and renewed connection. They attended Grace's children's graduation ceremonies together, sat side by side at holiday dinners, and eventually moved into the same assisted living community when maintaining separate homes became too difficult. Grace established a pediatric trauma center at her Seattle hospital, specializing in helping children recover from accidents and violence. When asked what inspired her career choice, she would simply say, "I understand what it means to lose a child," leaving listeners to assume she meant from her professional experience rather than her personal history. Young Anna McConnell Winters grew up with a special connection to the aunt she never knew. On her 18th birthday, she visited Willow Creek alone, spending an afternoon by the tree, her fingers tracing the carving that had changed her family's history. She later wrote her college application essay about names and legacies, about how people can be present even in absence, about how truth waits patiently to be discovered. The oak continued to grow, adding rings around Anime's carving, preserving rather than erasing it. New generations of Willow Creek children grew up knowing its story, not as a ghost tale or urban legend, but as a true account of loss, discovery, and the enduring connections that bind us to each other and to the past. And somewhere in the soil beneath its spreading roots, in the patterns of sunlight through its leaves, in the very fiber of its being, the tree held the memory of a 7-year-old girl who had, for one brief moment on a summer day, made her mark on the world, a mark that would ultimately bring her home.